Chaucer not only used existing French words for poetic effect, he also introduced his own elevated synonyms, sometimes bypassing an English word in favour of a more stylish French borrowing. So, English had the perfectly good hard as a noun. Chaucer borrowed the French word difficulté. In place of unhap, he gave us disadventure. For shenship, dishonesté. For building, edifice. For unconning, ignorant. And for meaning, signifiance. But Chaucer wasn't just ensnared with the elegance of French, he also cherished the directness and earthiness of English, and used it, for example, in The Miller's Tale, where the student Absalon's midnight assignation with a neighbour's wife doesn't go quite according to plan.
This Absalon gan weep his mouthful dree. Dirk was the nicht as pitch or as the coal, and at the window out she put her hole. And Absalon him fill ne bet ne worse, but with his mouth he kissed her naked airs.
The language, of course, is predominantly Old English, and again, Chaucer is aware of what linguists would call register. He knows that you have to have a particular style for a particular purpose. With The Miller's Tale, we have both the miller himself, who is a man of extraordinary qualities, so he opens doors simply by running at them with his head, which is a clever trick. And the story itself is, as you know, about bottoms out of windows and other such thing. And of course, in that case, it's appropriate to have a simple, earthy style. He knows that if he's talking about basic, earthy stuff, he might as well use good Old English words. And I think it's actually marked that use by not using many French words. I think people would have picked up on that. We certainly do. The style seems very direct, almost colloquial. Of course, that's literary artifice. But it does seem direct and colloquial, and that's as a complete result of the way in which he's using the language. The language he'd have heard on the streets. Words like ass, meaning arse, I'm afraid, and other such rude words.
Scholars dispute how much vocabulary Chaucer actually introduced into English. With Old English, he certainly reintroduced words which hadn't been written down since before 1100, probably because they weren't considered important or seemly enough. Words like churlish, farting, friendly, learning, loving, restless, swiven, wasp, wifely, and willingly. This is where the pilgrims who'd beguiled the miles with their various tales would have been making for. The shrine of Thomas a Becket in Canterbury Cathedral. The brilliant archbishop, son of a French merchant, had been brutally murdered in 1170 by knights acting on the wishes, if not instructions, of Henry II, that first Plantagenet, whose wife Eleanor had done so much to promote the courtly French language, which Chaucer was now mining so expertly. In Chaucer's day, this area around the cathedral and the nearby streets would have been thronged with pilgrims from all over the country. Well, the thronging hasn't changed, but they would have been speaking in the dialect of their homes. English wasn't uniform in the way it was spoken, and Chaucer himself in the Reeve's Tale gives us literature's first fully northerner, who speaks with flat vowels. He says him for home, na for no, gan for gone, and nan for none, all pronunciations that will be quite understandable in the northeast of England today. Chaucer himself worried about whether his work would be mispronounced or wrongly copied or just misunderstood in other parts of the country. He bids one of his poems, Troilus and Cressida, a rather worried farewell, voicing a concern he must also have felt for the Canterbury Tales.
Go, little book, and for there is so great diversity in English and in reading of our tongue, so pray God that none misread they, ne they mismetre for default of tongue, and read whereso thou be or else song that thou be understand. I God besage.
Of course, Chaucer's books, particularly the Canterbury Tales, were understood. His language, the language of late 14th century London, would become, with some later modifications, the standard form of English, and his genius in harnessing that language to serve his vision as a writer would guarantee that it lived on. A century and a half after his death, Geoffrey Chaucer was famous enough for this tomb to be put in Westminster Abbey. In the intervening years, his tales had spread round the country and delighted listeners and readers ranging from London merchants to the future Richard III. Before the 15th century was out, the Canterbury Tales had been printed by Thomas Caxton, ensuring the future of Chaucer's work and furthering the process by which Southern English, Chaucer's English, would become the standard. Chaucer was the first poet to be buried here in what's become Poets' Corner. It's appropriate for the man who not only entertained and delighted in his own work, but who, through expanding the capabilities of the English language, created a standard and a platform for those who followed.